On her third day at the Caldwell estate, Annie Sanders was still learning the rhythms of the house. The way the wind whistled through the cracked window panes upstairs, the dull creak in the floorboards outside the nursery, the unsettling stillness that seemed to hum beneath every polished surface. But nothing prepared her for the scream. It sliced through the morning like glass, high and sharp. A child's voice, filled with panic. Annie dropped the laundry basket and ran. She found the door to Madison Caldwell's room slightly ajar. Inside, 6-year-old Madison lay on her stomach, arms stretched out toward her wheelchair, positioned just out of reach. Her small body shook with frustration, legs twitching helplessly. She was born without shins and feet, and crawling even a few feet was a painful effort. Standing nearby was Victoria Mason, rigid, unmoved. Not helping. Watching. "Stop crying," Victoria said, her voice a calm blade. "You were born defective." Annie froze in the doorway. Then she stepped forward. She knelt beside Madison, ignoring the icy presence across the room. She gently touched the girl's cheek, wiping a tear with her thumb. "You have the most beautiful eyes," Annie whispered. Madison blinked up at her, confused, surprised. With practiced care, Annie lifted her into the wheelchair, adjusting the straps and buckling her in. The child's body relaxed, just slightly. Annie offered a small smile. Victoria said nothing. She didn't have to. Her silence radiated disapproval. Later that afternoon, the consequences came. Victoria found Annie in the kitchen. "There's grime on the second-floor hallway," she said coolly. "Scrub it. On your knees. No gloves." Annie met her gaze, but said nothing. She understood. This wasn't about cleanliness. It was about power, submission, a warning. So she knelt, bare hands against the wooden floor, and began to scrub. She didn't hear Gabriel Caldwell arrive until his shoes stopped inches from her. "What's going on?" he asked. Annie looked up, startled. Victoria appeared behind him, as calm as ever. "Just correcting some poor habits," Victoria said. Madison rolled quietly into the hall behind them, her expression unreadable. Then, in a small voice, she said, "Grandma hid my chair." Gabriel's eyes flicked to Annie, then to his mother. A moment of hesitation passed across his face. Just a dent in the armor, but it was there. "I'll speak with you both later," he said, then left for the office. After he was gone, Annie remained by Madison's side. She took the girl's hand as they sat together on the sunlit floor of the parlor. "You weren't born wrong," she said softly. "You were born special." Madison didn't speak, but her eyes shimmered. They made rag dolls out of scraps of fabric from an old sewing kit, giggling as they gave them crooked eyes and bright yarn hair. Annie named hers Clementine. Madison named her Stella. For the first time since Annie arrived, the little girl laughed. But the moment didn't last. Victoria appeared in the doorway. She said nothing as she walked past them, then turned abruptly and seized Madison by the arm. "No more of this nonsense," she snapped, dragging the child down the hall. Annie followed, but was stopped by the slam of the closet door and the sharp sound of the bolt sliding into place. "She needs to learn boundaries," Victoria said, brushing dust off her sleeve. "You do well to stay silent." Annie stood frozen outside the door, listening to the sound of Madison's breathing behind it, quick, frightened. That night, Grace, Gabriel's sister, found Annie sitting alone in the nursery. "She's done it before," Grace said quietly, hiding the chair, locking the child away, making her believe she caused Caroline's death. Annie turned sharply. "Did she?" Grace shook her head. "No. Caroline was taking Madison to see a specialist. That's all." Later, Gabriel sat beside his daughter and tucked her in. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Mommy left because of me." He pulled her close. "No, sweetheart. Mommy was trying to help you. You're my joy." The next morning, Annie found Madison in front of the mirror. She had fashioned a crown out of paper and was painting it with watercolor. Annie smiled. "Let's dress up today." They spent an hour trying on scarves and sunglasses, adding dots of blush to their cheeks. Annie painted a swirl of gold above Madison's brow. "You look powerful," she said. "I feel powerful," Madison replied, giggling. Then the door swung open. Victoria stormed in, eyes scanning the room with disdain. She snatched the scarf from Madison's neck and wiped the paint from her face with a wet cloth. "Stop pretending," she spat. "You're defective, just like your mother. She couldn't handle you. That's why she's gone." From the hallway, Gabriel's voice rang out. Caroline was going to the orthopedist. She wasn't running from anything. Victoria turned, caught off guard. He stepped inside, calm but direct. "Don't rewrite history." Cornered, Victoria yanked Madison's wheelchair backward. Gabriel crossed the room in 3 strides. He lifted his daughter gently, placing her into the spare chair they kept in the closet. She clung to his shirt as he carried her from the room. Annie watched them go. Then, from the window, she saw Victoria outside, whispering in hushed tones with attorney Robert Galvin. The hallways of the Caldwell estate had a new kind of tension now. Annie felt it in the air, charged, watchful. Gabriel had started asking questions, and Victoria wasn't used to being questioned, especially not in her own home. Annie was returning from the garden one afternoon when she turned the corner and nearly collided with Robert Galvin. The attorney blocked her path with a smooth smile and a polished suit. "Annie," he said, voice calm but cool. "We haven't really had a proper conversation." She offered a polite nod, trying to step around him. But he shifted, subtly, cutting off her path again. "You're good with the girl," he said, tone almost admiring. "Too good, maybe. It's easy to get attached in a house like this." "I'm just doing my job," Annie said, keeping her voice neutral. Robert's smile didn't move. "Then let's keep it that way. Don't confuse kindness with involvement." Annie's eyes narrowed. "Is that a warning?" "Just advice," he said. "Houses like this, they're full of risks. Accidents happen, especially when people start to forget their place." He stepped aside and walked away without looking back. Later that evening, Grace found Annie folding laundry and closed the door behind her. "Be careful with Robert," she said without prompting. "I already got the warning speech," Annie replied. The thinly veiled threat, too. Grace leaned against the dresser, eyes tired but watchful. "He and Victoria run this house like a private kingdom. Gabriel signs the checks, but they control everything else." "They're afraid of Madison," Annie said softly. "They're afraid of the truth," Grace corrected. "About Caroline. About what she knew. She told me, days before the accident, 'Don't trust Victoria if something happens to me.' She knew something was off." Annie felt her stomach tighten. "You think it wasn't an accident?" Grace didn't answer. She didn't need to. That night, Annie found Madison sitting in the window seat, the stuffed rag doll they made clasped in her lap. The child's face was quiet, thoughtful. "You okay?" Annie asked. Madison nodded, then added, "Thank you." "For what?" "For making me feel beautiful." Annie knelt beside her. "You are beautiful. You're strong and smart and kind. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Madison leaned into her, silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Will they take me away?" Annie stilled. She didn't lie. "Not while I'm here." The next morning, black sedans began to arrive. Annie didn't recognize most of the guests. Stern faces, dark suits, hushed voices. One by one, they entered the library, where Victoria stood waiting with a clipboard and her attorney. The door closed. Annie moved quietly to the landing above and crouched, listening. Victoria's voice carried just enough, composed, persuasive. She needs more than this house can offer. Structure, medical oversight, therapy routines. An institution, yes, but a compassionate one, with the right efficiency. One man muttered something about liability. Another mentioned long-term costs. No one mentioned Madison's name like she was a person. Annie's stomach churned. Below her, Madison was sitting rigid in her chair, eyes wide, straining to hear. Annie came down the stairs, knelt beside her, and took her hand. "They can't decide that," Madison whispered. "Can they?" "Not while I'm here," Annie repeated. Later, in the study, Victoria and Robert spoke more freely. The mood was different now, more transactional, less performance. Robert thumbed through a folder of papers. If we move her into centralized care, it simplifies the trust. I can consolidate the assets, reduce discretionary spending. No more individual stipends. One institutional payment, fully legal. Victoria nodded. Gabriel's getting sentimental. We need to act before he slips further. He's distracted, Robert said. We use that. Neither noticed that the window was cracked open. Outside, just beneath it, Annie stood very still, phone in hand. She didn't record them, not yet. But she remembered every word. That evening, Robert caught her again in the kitchen. This time, there was no attempt at charm. You're clever, he said. But this is your last warning. Stay in your lane. Annie met his eyes without flinching. Madison is not your liability. Robert smiled faintly. No, but she's not your child either. Then he turned and walked away. Before dawn, Gabriel stirred. He found Madison awake in her bed, curled tightly beneath the blanket, her bear clutched against her chest. I couldn't sleep, she whispered. Gabriel sat beside her and brushed her hair back gently. Tell me what's hurting, he said. Madison hesitated. Grandma says I'm ugly. That mommy left because of me. He froze, then took her hands in his. No, he said firmly. Your mother loved you more than anything. She didn't leave you. She was going to help you. That's the truth. Madison blinked quickly, trying not to cry. She said I broke Mommy. Gabriel leaned forward, forehead to hers. You are not broken. You are my joy. That morning, Annie entered with a book tucked under her arm. Madison's face brightened. Tell me a story. Annie grinned. It's about a princess. One who couldn't walk, but who had a special kind of magic. What kind? The kind that makes people brave. Do I have powers? Annie nodded. The strongest one. You make people love you without trying. In the garden that afternoon, Gabriel found Annie cutting flowers for the kitchen vase. She smiled today, he said. She smiled because she felt safe. He paused. Thank you for giving her that. Annie looked up at him. I didn't give her anything she didn't already have. I just reminded her. They stood there for a moment in silence, sunlight filtering through the trees. Then Annie glanced back at the house. Victoria stood in the upstairs window, watching. A phone pressed to her ear. Her lips barely moved. She's getting close, she said. Fix it. Mid-morning sunlight streamed through the Caldwell Estate's library windows when Victoria's voice cut through the quiet. They're missing, she said. Annie, walking by the open door with a dusting cloth in hand, paused. Gabriel stepped into the room a moment later, brow furrowed. What's missing? Victoria pointed to the empty space inside the jewelry cabinet. Caroline's pearls, her diamond earrings, and the ring. Gabriel's eyes darkened. Her engagement ring? Yes. Victoria looked measured, calm, but her hands fussed with her bracelet. It's not about the monetary value. It's sentimental. And now it's gone. Robert Galvin, already in the room, turned toward Gabriel as if offering a solution, not a trap. This doesn't have to be a crisis, he said. Let's handle it discreetly. We check the staff rooms. Quietly. If nothing turns up, we move on. Without accusation? Gabriel asked carefully. Exactly, Robert replied, smiling. Victoria said nothing, just folded her arms. Gabriel hesitated, just long enough for everyone to know he hated the idea. Then, fine, but only with that condition. 10 minutes later, Annie stood in the doorway of her room, hands folded in front of her apron. She looked from Gabriel to Robert to Victoria, then silently stepped aside to let them enter. I don't understand, she said quietly. No one's accusing you, Gabriel said, and to his credit, his voice was soft. Regretful. We just need to clear this up. Victoria began opening drawers with brisk efficiency, checking the wardrobe, then the closet. Nothing. Robert took over the linen cabinet. And then, as if he had done it 100 times before, he reached behind the neatly folded towels and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Victoria gasped. That's it. Inside was Caroline's engagement ring. Annie's heart dropped. That's not mine. Gabriel opened the pouch, held up the ring. It caught the light, a thin platinum band, the oval diamond unmistakable. He looked at her. Tell me this isn't yours. Annie met his eyes. Her voice shook, but not her words. It isn't. Behind them, Madison's wheelchair creaked softly as she rolled into the hallway. She took one look at Annie's face and then turned toward the others, her own face tightening. Annie wouldn't steal, she said. Robert stepped forward. I think it's time we contact the police. No, Madison cried. She didn't. Before anyone could move, Grace entered at a near run, breathless and red in the face. Stop. Everyone turned. I saw him, she said, pointing at Robert. I saw him upstairs last night. East hallway. Past midnight. Robert scoffed. That proves nothing. I checked the hall clock, Grace snapped. It was 1:17 a.m. Gabriel turned slowly. Security footage covers that wing. Then check it, Grace said. Now. It didn't take long. They gathered in the den around Gabriel's laptop as the security team fed in the hallway camera from 1 a.m. to 2. The image was grainy, but clear enough. There, Robert, climbing the stairs, a pouch in his hand, heading in the direction of the staff quarters. No one spoke for several seconds. Robert tried to recover. You don't understand. I was testing her. I needed to be sure she wasn't a risk. For Gabriel's sake. Gabriel stood slowly. You set up a woman to be arrested. It was just to scare her. You're fired. Robert blinked. Gabriel. I said go. Robert stiffened, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked out of the room. Grace let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Madison wheeled over to Annie and held her hand. Gabriel didn't speak, but for the first time, his silence was entirely on Annie's side. Outside, Robert climbed into his car, jaw tight. His phone was already in hand as he started the engine. He waited until the gate opened. Then he spoke into the receiver. Plan A failed. Move to B. In the garden, the air had shifted. Madison's laugh returned like a songbird after a storm, bright and fragile, but real. She chased butterflies in her wheelchair while Annie sat on the steps watching her. Gabriel joined her, hands in his pockets. She's different when she's safe, he said. She's always been this, Annie replied. She just needed the space to be seen. They sat for a moment, neither saying much. Then Gabriel said her name. Annie. She turned to him. Thank you for staying. For not running when you had every right to. She shook her head. You don't have to thank me. I do. Annie looked across the lawn to where Madison was spinning circles beneath the sun. Promise me something? She asked. Anything. Don't let them do that to her again. I won't. Through the library window, Victoria watched them. Her expression didn't crack, but her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted her phone. She's getting too close, she said into the receiver. Her voice was ice. Fix it. The house had gone quiet again, but it was no longer the silence of order. It was something heavier. Annie had learned to listen to that silence. She could tell when it meant trouble. It came in whispers, in footsteps outside the wrong doors at the wrong times. In the way Victoria had started watching her again, not with curiosity, but calculation. It made her wonder, what had Caroline seen before it was too late? She didn't have to wonder long. Grace found Annie in the hallway, a file box in her arms. She looked tired, but not uncertain. I should have told you sooner, Grace said. About Caroline's last day. Annie helped her carry the box into the sitting room. She was running errands, normal ones. Clerk's office to check paperwork, the orthopedist for Madison's records. But when she got home, she had a folder. Thick. Full. She wouldn't let me see it. What did she say? Annie asked. She said, if anything happens to me, don't leave Madison with Victoria. Promise me. Grace's voice cracked. And then her brakes failed. She continued. Brand new. Installed 3 days before. The report said it was a malfunction. But it felt too neat. Annie sat very still. That night, when most of the house was asleep, Annie stood before the door of Caroline's old room. She'd never been inside. The door wasn't locked. She pushed it open. The room had been left untouched. White sheets draped the furniture like ghosts. A light layer of dust coated the surfaces. The scent of old perfume still lingered in the air. On the vanity, tucked beneath a silver tray, Annie found an envelope with Gabriel written across the front. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a letter, written in hurried ink. If you're reading this, I'm gone. There are secrets in this house, close to us. I don't know how much time I have, but I know where the truth begins. Look where we kept our dreams. Annie stared at the words, heart pounding. She turned as a sound echoed outside the door, footsteps. Heavy, measured. She slid into the closet just as it opened. Victoria entered first. Robert followed. They didn't turn on the light. She's getting nosy, Victoria said. She's in Caroline's room. I don't need her digging up anything else. We can stage something, Robert offered. Slippery stairs. An open window. She's just the help. No one asks too many questions. From her hiding place, Annie barely breathed. If we'd acted sooner, Victoria snapped. Caroline wouldn't have had time to leave clues. She didn't finish what she started, Robert said. We make sure Annie doesn't, either. Their voices faded as they left the room. Annie remained hidden for another 5 minutes before daring to move. She gripped Caroline's letter and ran straight to Grace. Gabriel didn't need convincing. He led them through the house, up 2 sets of stairs, past the attic ladder. At the very top, behind a storage closet, was a narrow wooden door. He opened it. This was our dream place, he said quietly. Caroline and I used to come here to talk about writing a book. A love story. We never started it, but we always said this is where it would begin. He knelt beside the far wall, ran his hand along the baseboard, and pulled back a loose plank. Inside was a metal tin. Annie's breath caught as he opened it. Inside, old ledgers, marked and annotated. Bank documents. Photocopies of checks. Names, Victoria and Robert, listed across transactions that didn't match. Sums of money moved from the family trust into shell accounts. At the bottom was a folded note. If I vanish, give this to Detective Martinez. And Gabriel, if you're reading this, know this truth. You were never adopted by strangers. Your real parents were Edward and Helen Caldwell. Victoria was your guardian, not your mother. Gabriel didn't move. Grace sank slowly onto a nearby trunk. Annie whispered, "She lied to you your whole life." He folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket. His voice was calm, but his hands shook. "She stole my parents, then my wife, and now my daughter." He stood. "We go back downstairs. We say nothing until we're ready." Victoria was waiting when they returned to the main floor. She looked from face to face, but none of them betrayed what they had found. "Everything all right?" she asked smoothly. "Perfectly," Gabriel replied. She followed him into the study. There, her mask slipped further. "She's a problem, Gabriel," Victoria said, referring to Annie. "You can't trust her motives. She's wrapped herself around Madison, around you. But this house needs order. We need to think of solutions." "What kind of solutions?" "A quiet arrangement. Marriage, maybe. If she's part of the family, we control the story. The assets. The girl." Gabriel stared at her, something long dead coming awake in his eyes. "You want me to marry someone to keep power under your thumb? I want you to protect what's yours." He stepped back. "You are not my mother." She froze. He walked toward her, voice calm, low. "You lied about Edward. About Helen. You stole my life. You pushed Caroline until she feared for her safety. And you took from a trust meant to protect a child." Her eyes widened. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me how you killed my wife." Victoria's mask cracked completely. "She was going to ruin everything," she screamed. "She was going to expose us." Silence followed. Then she turned and fled the room. Annie reached for her phone and dialed. "This is Annie Caldwell Sanders," she said. "Please send Detective Martinez. We have evidence of fraud and possibly murder." "The Caldwell estate." "Yes. It's urgent." The dispatcher's voice was calm. ETA approximately 2 hours. Annie hung up. 2 hours. That was all the time Victoria and Robert had left, and they weren't going to waste it. It started with a sound, a thud, followed by silence. Annie dropped the tea tray and ran. At the top of the stairs, she found Grace collapsed at the landing, blood trickling from her temple, eyes barely open. "Madison," she whispered, struggling to stay conscious. Annie's breath caught. She turned toward the girl's bedroom. The door stood open, the bed empty. No wheelchair. No bear. No child. Then the phone rang. Gabriel answered, and the voice on the other end froze the room. "Victoria, you're going to listen carefully," she said. "Your daughter is safe, for now." Gabriel gripped the phone tighter. "Where is she?" "You'll get her back once I get what I want," Victoria replied, cool and calm. "Sign over control of your fortune. Dissolve the trust. Send the maid away for good, or you'll never see Madison again." Gabriel's voice shook with fury. "Where is she?" "Grandfather's farm," she said. "The old barn. Come alone. Bring the papers." Then the line went dead. Annie stood beside him, already shaking her head. "You're not going alone." Gabriel met her eyes. "I don't have a choice." "You do," she said. "And we do this together." They gathered quickly. Grace, conscious but weak, insisted on helping from the car. She would wait nearby with a second phone, ready to call the police. Gabriel would go through the barn's front entrance, carrying decoy paperwork in an old folder. Annie would circle around with Grace's phone to record everything: audio, video, whatever they could get. Her job was simple: get Madison out. And for Madison, Annie packed the small teddy bear from her bed, a soft promise that she was coming. Before they left, Gabriel turned to Annie. "If we survive this," she smiled, "even now, we will. Then marry me." Annie's voice caught. "Yes." And just like that, they drove into the night. The barn stood in silhouette against the fading sky. Wind rustled the tall grass around it, brushing the faded wooden planks. Gabriel stepped from the car, folder in hand. Annie slipped off around the side, heart pounding in her chest. Inside, Madison sat tied to a chair beneath a swaying bulb, small and still, but not crying. Her bear was gone. Her eyes were wide and red. She didn't look scared anymore, just waiting. Annie crouched beneath the broken window at the side of the barn. Her phone was already recording. She could hear voices. Gabriel stepped inside. Robert met him, standing stiff near the center beam, holding a pistol in one hand, loose but ready. Victoria stood beside him, smug and composed. "You brought the papers?" she asked. Gabriel lifted the folder. "Let her go." "All in good time," Robert said. "Set them down on the barrel." Gabriel obeyed. Victoria walked slowly around the edge of the barn, circling him like a vulture. "You know, we watched you hunt for the truth. Every drawer you opened, every room you crept into. We let you get just far enough." Gabriel said nothing. She stepped closer. "You wanted to know how your wife died? So did she. That's what killed her." Robert added, "It wasn't just Caroline. Edward, Helen, all of it. It was necessary. Power belongs to those who take it." Victoria's voice sharpened. "Caroline would have dismantled everything we built. I gave her a choice. She didn't take it." Gabriel's eyes burned. "You murdered her." "She made her decision," Victoria said coldly. "Just like you must now." Robert shoved the paperwork toward him. "Sign it. All of it. The estate, the trust, financial power. Then we talk." Gabriel opened the folder. He signed. Each stroke of the pen was slow, deliberate, buying time. From the shadows, Annie moved. She slipped through the side door, staying low, edging toward Madison's chair. The child spotted her and blinked, but didn't speak. Annie pressed a finger to her lips and began working on the rope. Then Victoria turned. She caught movement, raised the gun. Annie threw herself forward, slamming into her. The two women crashed to the ground, the pistol clattering away into the hay. Gabriel seized a wooden plank and swung it hard, knocking Robert to the floor. He scrambled to Madison, cutting the last rope. He scooped her up. Victoria screamed and lunged for the gun. Her hand closed around it. Then, sirens. Red and blue lights flooded the barn slats. Officers burst through every door, shouting commands. The air exploded in motion. Drop the weapon. Victoria lifted the gun, then hesitated. Two officers tackled her to the floor. The weapon flew from her grip. She fought like a wild animal, kicking, screaming. But it was over. Robert, dazed and bleeding, tried to run. He made it 5 steps before a deputy brought him down. Outside, under the floodlights, Detective Martinez approached with quiet purpose. Gabriel handed him the ledger. Annie passed over the phone. "We got it all," she said, voice shaking. Martinez nodded. "You did good." He looked toward the barn, where Victoria and Robert were being loaded into separate cruisers. They won't see daylight for a long time. That night, Madison curled up between Gabriel and Annie. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She was safe. The drive home from the barn was long, winding through quiet back roads lined with dark trees and stars. In the back seat, Madison lay curled up beneath Annie's coat, her bear tucked safely in her arms. She didn't speak, but her breathing was steady. Each exhale was a little softer than the last, like she was slowly letting go of fear. Up front, Gabriel kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the edge of Annie's seat. He hadn't said much since the sirens faded behind them. Neither had Annie. They didn't need to. Relief and grief moved together through the car like twin passengers, bound up in everything unsaid, everything survived. Finally, Gabriel spoke. "I used to think family was about blood." Annie turned her head slightly. "But it's not," he said, voice low. "It's about care. About who shows up, who stays, who protects you when it's hard." Annie looked back at Madison, still sleeping, and nodded. "Then we've been a family for a long time." The days that followed were quiet. Not empty, just calm. For the first time in years, the Caldwell estate wasn't heavy. The air felt clear. The rooms, once too grand and too cold, had become a home. Madison's laughter returned, tentative at first, then brighter each day. Her bruises faded. Her nightmares lessened. She clung to Annie more than usual, but Annie never pulled away. She'd earned that closeness. Gabriel kept his distance from work for the first time in months. He took Madison to school in the mornings, brought Annie lunch when she studied on the porch, and stayed home for dinner every night. The future had cracked open, and they were ready to step into it. A week later, under the wide branches of the neem tree, Gabriel proposed again. This time, there was no urgency, no trauma, no danger lurking around the bend. Just him, holding a simple ring in steady hands, while Madison picked flowers in the background. "I want this for real," he said. "For all of us." Annie laughed through tears. "Yes. 100 times, yes." Madison ran over and hugged them both. "Does this mean I get a new dress?" Grace, from the porch, raised a teacup. "And I get to plan a garden wedding." The wedding was simple, just as they wanted. 20 guests. Strings of soft lanterns hanging from the trees. Wildflowers lining the grass. Grace made the food herself. Herb chicken, roasted vegetables, warm bread, and lemon cake for dessert. The ceremony took place under the neem tree, where everything had begun to heal. Judge Henry, an old friend of Caroline's and a quiet ally through the family's troubles, stood with a gentle smile and a book in hand. Before the ceremony, Detective Martinez called. "The confessions are in," he said. Victoria's team tried to push for diminished capacity. It didn't stick. The money trail sealed it. She and Robert are both facing long sentences. "Good," Gabriel said. "Thank you." Martinez paused. "You did right by your daughter." Gabriel looked across the lawn, where Madison practiced tossing flower petals from her lap. "No," he said. "She did right by me." At 2:30, the music began. Madison wheeled herself slowly down the aisle, sprinkling petals with delight. She wore a white sash and a tiny crown Annie had sewn from ribbon and gold thread. Then Annie came through the trees. She wore a soft ivory dress, simple and luminous. No veil, no theatrics, just peace. Gabriel watched her come toward him, as if seeing something holy. She took his hand. Judge Henry welcomed them. Gabriel went first. "I've made mistakes," he said. "I've let silence and fear keep me from the people I love. But you broke through that. You gave Madison her joy back. And you gave me mine." He turned slightly to look at Madison, then back at Annie. "I vow to be your husband, and a father who shows up, who stays, who protects." Annie's eyes shimmered. "I walked into this house not knowing what I'd find. But I found a child who changed my life, and a man who reminded me how to trust." She turned to Madison. "And you, my girl, made me a mother. I will never take that for granted. I vow to love you both, with an open, steady heart." The kiss was met with quiet applause. Nothing loud or wild. Just the warmth of family and friends who knew what it took to get here. They ate beneath the trees, bathed in lantern light and late afternoon sun. Laughter bubbled across the tables. Grace told stories. Madison insisted on cake before vegetables. Gabriel said yes. That night, when the lights were dim and the house was quiet, Madison climbed into bed between them. She curled close, safe and sure, her crown resting on the nightstand. Neither Annie nor Gabriel moved her. They just smiled and pulled the blankets tighter. 6 months later, the rhythm of the house had settled into something golden. Madison had grown more confident than ever. Her school adored her. Teachers sent home notes not just about her grades, but her kindness. She had made space for every lonely kid, especially the ones like her. She was thriving. Annie had graduated and started teaching at a local school with a focus on accessible education. Her students were bright, bold, and wildly different, and she loved them for it. Gabriel had returned to work part-time, but always made it home by dinner. He coached Madison's wheelchair dance team on weekends. Grace still ran the kitchen, still told stories, still pretended her lemon cakes weren't award-worthy. They didn't need any more weddings or rescues or promises. They had each other, and that was enough. 1 year after everything, the Caldwell house no longer felt like a legacy, it felt like a home. There were still echoes, still memories in the wood and glass. But there was warmth now, and life in every corner. Windows stayed open to let the breeze through. Music drifted from the parlor on Saturday mornings. The scent of rosemary and warm bread welcomed anyone who walked through the front door. And in the kitchen, Annie Caldwell Sanders stood barefoot, flipping pancakes and quizzing Madison on spelling words while Grace chopped strawberries behind her. "Spell generous," Annie said. Madison, now 9 and beaming, spun in her chair at the kitchen table. "G-N-E-R-O-U-S. Like me." Annie laughed. "Exactly like you." Annie ran the home now, not in title, but in rhythm. She managed the household calendar, oversaw repairs, sent reminders about doctor appointments, and still found time in the evenings to write lesson plans and take online classes. She'd earned her degree in education the month before, with Madison cheering the loudest in the back row of the ceremony. Now, Annie worked part-time at a nearby school that specialized in children with physical disabilities. It was fulfilling, challenging, and full of faces that reminded her why she'd started this journey at all. One afternoon, the school called, but not for trouble. When Annie arrived, she was met at the front office with smiles. "No need to worry," the teacher said quickly. "We just thought you'd want to hear something special." Madison had spent the day with a new student named Peter, a quiet boy who used a wheelchair and struggled to make eye contact. During recess, Madison had rolled over, introduced herself, and asked if he liked superheroes. She'd taught him a made-up game called Cape Tag and insisted everyone else learn it too. He smiled, the teacher said. For the first time since he got here, Annie left the school with her heart full and eyes misty. That night at dinner, Gabriel raised his glass of water with a smile. "I'd like to make a toast." They all turned toward him. "To Madison," he said, "for the way she walks into every room and makes it better. For her generous heart." Madison grinned. "And for being good at tag." They laughed. Later, as they cleaned up the dishes and Grace started singing an off-key lullaby to the cat, Annie leaned into Gabriel as he dried a plate beside her. "Any regrets?" she asked softly. He paused for just a second, then turned to her. "Only that I didn't find you both sooner." Their life wasn't perfect. Some days were harder than others. Madison still had occasional nightmares. Annie still woke some mornings thinking about that night at the barn. And Gabriel sometimes went quiet when he passed a photograph of his late wife. But they were learning. They didn't try to erase the past anymore. They honored it, even the hard parts. It had shaped them, but it didn't define them. One quiet Sunday afternoon, with no guests and no plans, Grace brought out chocolate cake for no reason. Everyone knew what that meant. It meant gratitude. They ate under the neem tree, where Gabriel and Annie had said their vows. The lanterns still hung from the branches. Flowers bloomed beneath their feet. They talked about how pain had taught them to see the light more clearly, how losing things had made them value what stayed. And then, Madison looked up from her plate. "Can I ask something?" "Always," Gabriel said. She fidgeted with her fork. "Could we adopt a little brother?" Annie blinked. Gabriel set his glass down slowly. "There's room," Madison added. "In the car. In the house. In our hearts." Grace chimed in from the other end of the table. "I can cook for 6. Or 10. Just don't make me learn gluten-free." Everyone laughed, but the conversation lingered. They didn't say yes right away. They just looked at each other and knew they'd find the answer together. That night, the house glowed. The hallway was lined with framed drawings, Madison's family portraits, Annie's graduation photo, Gabriel and Madison's beach selfie, and one painted canvas that read in bold letters, "Love lives here." In the windowsills, flowers nodded in the breeze. The scent of lemon and linen hung in the air. In the master bedroom, the family lay close, Gabriel on one side, Annie on the other, and Madison between them, her hair curled beneath her chin. They didn't need to say anything. They just breathed together. They were safe. Outside, the lights stayed on a little longer than usual, not because they were afraid of the dark, but because they knew, whatever came tomorrow, love would be the one to meet it at the door.